Welcome back to yet another review for the X-Men franchise. Today we're going to be looking at the second solo installment for a Wolverine story. The Wolverine was directed by James Mangold, and once again Hugh Jackman reprises his role as Logan, or Wolverine. This is a story after the events of X-Men The Last Stand. After the death of Jean Grey, he has gone off and been a solo act now. He's living in the woods and doesn't want to deal with anybody. But he is later thrown back into action when he meets a girl by the name of Yukio, who was sent from an old friend of his back in the day. A man by the name of Yashida, who he had once helped live through a nuclear bomb, is now asking him to come and visit him in his dying days. But in doing so, he now has to protect his granddaughter and uncover mysteries that he did not expect. So this is technically the third movie, so it's the sequel to this Wolverine trilogy that happens here, but it's more or less the sequel to X-Men The Last Stand. Now, I'm going to get this out the way first. There is a ton of Asian actors in here that did a great job in this movie, and unfortunately, I am not great with names, so I'm just going to get the apology out the way first before I go any further into this review. For starters, we got a new director on hand, and it's James Mangold, who is 10 billion times better making this movie than what happened in X-Men Origins. And the proof is shown right at the beginning of this movie. We see Wolverine back in World War II, where he is now a prison in a Japanese camp that is about to be bombed by a nuclear bomb. Rather than letting the man die, he ends up going out and saving Yashida, bringing him down in this imprisoned tunnel that he is sitting in, and he ends up saving him. Now, what's awesome about this scene too is not only is it just the shots are really well done and the tone is just set beautifully here, the effect that they do with Hugh Jackman here, where they have him survive this explosion and his skin is fried off basically, is one of the better examples of his healing factor. We've already had a ton of examples of this throughout this entire franchise, but this was one of them that was one of the most impressive that I had seen. So we realize that this is a dream from him. He ends up waking up next to Jean Grey, where he talks to her saying that he had vowed to that he will never kill again, even though she says you would already have. We see that Jean Grey is being stabbed by Wolverine yet again, to which this makes him spiral and waking up out of yet another nightmare. Logan is now alone in a forest, away from all the X-Men, living out his days, trying not to harm anybody as a promise to Jean Grey. Now, I love this because you get this disheveled look from Wolverine, and you also get a little shot of him with a bear that lives in the woods, and it's kind of like his friend. And I don't know, I just found it a little funny here. There's so many great things here with Jackman. His acting is just off the charts in here. He's always great in this character, but I think that this movie further proved that. He gets a whole movie to himself yet again, and he really gets to stretch the acting role in this a little bit too. He gets to do a lot more fun stuff when interacting with people, especially when he gets talking with the hunters that live in this area. One of the scenes that I enjoyed here is we see Wolverine finding the bear that he had saw earlier, that he clearly knows at this point, is shot with an arrow, and it's a poison arrow, and you could just tell with him talking to the bear and the way it looks at him is that they want him to put him out of his misery, which is basically breaking his code, but he eventually does it just to put the bear down so he doesn't have to live through that pain anymore. But what's great about this scene is what comes a little bit later, because we see him take the arrow, he sniffs it and realizes that it's a poison dart. So he ends up finding the men who were out in the woods earlier, and then seeing that they were all at a bar celebrating this victory that he had had. And this is where you get even more sassy Logan, and it's just the best right here.
Go ahead, ask me where I found it. Ask me.
Where did you find it?
Well, funny you should ask.
And trust me, that will not be the end of it. But this is eventually where he meets a girl named Yukio. She comes into the bar after kind of spying on him for the last couple of days, and basically shows off that she is a skilled swordsman, and tells Wolverine to not even bother with them because half of them will die in the near future in a car crash. So Logan reluctantly kind of goes with her, and basically we get a little bit of the info dump for this portion of the story. Yoshida, the man that he had saved earlier in the film from that bomb that had gone off in Japan, is asking for him to come back because because he is dying and he wanted to give him the sword that he had given him in that moment. Rita Fukushima really plays this role up because she's supposed to be like this semi-mutant, and she's really skilled with a sword, and she basically goes to him asking for him to come to Japan to seek the person that he had saved long ago, and she gives him the line saying that he is a soldier and he is like any soldier who is looking for a honorable death, which I just love because when you think about his whole history and everything, it kind of makes sense. So Wolverine ends up going to Japan with another funny scene where he talks about his love for flying. He ends up going there, and then because he sees the old man dying, we see his granddaughter. And his granddaughter's name is Mariko. After being told that he needed to be, cleaned up a little bit because of his long hair and his beard, he ends up seeing Yoshida in his hospital bed talking about their history together for a brief moment. This is when Yoshida decides to tell Logan that, hey, I really don't want to die, and you can heal really good, and you maybe want to give me that good stuff. So it throws Logan off a little bit because obviously he was there just to say goodbye, and he doesn't want to be told that he could just have his healing factor taken away. And this is when there's also more info dump where he talks about how his granddaughter's in danger of her life, and he ends up giving the great line to Yoshida saying, "You don't want what I've got."
My granddaughter, she's my treasure. She must be protected.
You don't want what I've got.
So Logan has to stay overnight at Yoshida's place after saying his goodbyes, and we end up seeing Viper here because she pretends to be Jean Grey and kisses him and basically kind of poisons him in a way, but we learn more about this later on in the story. What's the pressing matter here after this stuff happens is Yoshida apparently died overnight. So they have a funeral the next day, and because Yoshida was already telling him that Mariko is in danger, he ends up having to fight a bunch of people at this funeral that they have. And I really love this scene. The funeral fight scene is shot really well, and there's great moments where you get close-ups on Hugh Jackman's face, and you could clearly tell just by the camera angle and the distorted image around the corners of the frames that there is something a little bit off with him right now. I think the fight is quick-paced. It's edited really well. There's a lot of great longer kind of takes here where it allows Hugh Jackman and everybody else to kind of play around a little bit and do a little bit more with the scene that it's in. This then leads to him taking Mariko around the city so that he can basically keep her away from the men that are trying to attack her. The fight kind of ends here and stalls for a moment for them to kind of talk to each other, but then it quickly picks up again with another fight scene that happens on a bullet train. And throughout this time, we finally realize as he goes in the bathroom to inspect his wounds that he is not healing for whatever reason. So as he's saving Mariko, they end up going to a couple's hotel that it's called, and there's just some funny moments here. There's also a great shot with Wolverine kind of standing on the balcony after she had asked if he was sleeping anywhere, and he had said that he wasn't. So you just see him kind of standing on the balcony, kind of contemplating over all of the stuff that had happened. There's also another cool couple funny moments here where we see Logan waking up and being treated by a veterinarian. The best part about it is that this is a student veterinarian, and eventually he goes to shake his hand to tell him hey, appreciate it, but apparently he cut him a couple times while he was getting stitched up. So there's just a funny part where he goes, okay, and I don't know. This film is very underrated funny. I could go on and on about a lot of the jokes in here, but if you watch it, or if you have watched it, you know that it's littered with a lot of those mini jokes throughout. And during this time too, we also see Viper kind of tagging along with one of Mariko's ex-boyfriends. He's an archer of some kind or whatever, so she kind of shows off her powers a little bit here with some of the venom that she does, and then basically wants her to bring back Mariko alive and is able to kill Logan because she eliminated his healing factor. We see later on that Logan and Mariko end up going to this weird house that they're in towards the south side of the city, I guess. And they have a couple of character moments where they're talking about each other's lives and everything. And then this promptly makes one of the dumber decisions in this movie, unfortunately. This movie has Logan sleeping with her at one point, and the tone of that just kind of doesn't make sense to me. It's kind of you're, struggling over the loss of Jean Grey. You're just trying to protect her. And then for them to just kind of have sexy fun time for really not a great reason was a little bit of kind of like an annoyance to me when I went back and watched this. But all is forgiven because we see Mariko get captured not too long after, and Wolverine is now on the hunt for her yet again. We see Yukio kind of come back in the fold because they had been on the run for so long that they had split up for a while, but now that they have come back together and they're looking for her fiance who has something to do with the plot here. They basically go and find this guy, and he's like in this hotel with a bunch of strippers or whatever, and they're trying to get him to talk into explaining some things. The basis of this is that the man Shingen, which is Mariko's father, the son of Yoshida, put a hit on his daughter because he wants to own the company rather than her. Yoshida left everything into Mariko's name, and he has grown jealous, so now he saw that this was the best way to get the company in while also paying off the fiance if he decides to help him out. You get some great back and forth here with the sassy Wolverine stuff here, but there's also a lot of great like interrogation stuff that they do here. This really shows how badass Wolverine can be. Especially ends with this final little bit of dialogue after he throws him out of a window.
You wanted the truth! I told you the truth! I didn't like it.
Oh. How did you know there's a pole down there?
I didn't.
So Logan and Yukio eventually go back to Yoshida's place to see if Mariko was even there. But Logan realizes that he's looking at a bunch of the jars that were in the room that Yoshida was in. He notices that some of the jars are empty from the metal bugs that were inside his body. He takes a look at the x-ray and realizes that the reason his healing factor isn't working is because he has one of those bugs stuck to his heart. This leads to a really great scene where we kind of see him having to cut open himself and having to dig into his own body to take out this bug. It's just really gruesome and like as pushes the PG-13 stuff a little bit here, so I'm glad that they kind of were allowed to do a little bit with this. This sparks a pretty awesome fight that has Yukio and Shingen here while he is trying to take the bug out of his body, but then it gets even better because once he gets the bug out of his body, Shingen and then Wolverine then have a duel, and this stuff is just awesome. Like this alone makes this movie great. It's at night, so like the lights is like really dim and like blue basically. They're fighting in front of like the old Japanese kind of like sliding doors, so like the shadows and everything look great. I almost wish that there was like a silhouette version of the fight in here somewhere, but for what we got here, the two of them fighting each other was just awesome. Ending the fight with one of the most badass line deliveries at the end of the day.
What kind of monster are you? The Wolverine.
So Logan realizes that he must now go to one of the temples that was shown on the wall portrait that he has to go and find Mariko. There's also a really cool scene here too where he kind of travels through this town and basically is like running up to this new building, but as he's doing it, a bunch of ninjas are like shooting arrows in the back of his spine. It's just a really great visual where you see him kind of like his arms stretched out and all the arrows are on the back of him. It's just a really cool visual to me personally. However, this is also where we get to a little bit more negatives with the story, unfortunately. We see Viper have Wolverine trapped in this contraption and basically gets him to have his claws shoot out and keep him in place. We then see a comic villain come to this story, which is the Silver Samurai. Yoshida had apparently stored away as much adamantium as possible after being obsessed with the man after he had saved him. He had now made a suit completely made out of adamantium. With this, there's a pretty decent fight at parts here. It's not the greatest thing in the world. It's like okay in parts. The stuff with Viper gets pretty boring and kind of just thrown to the left side, and it's really kind of wasted at the end of the day. The actress was good in her role, don't get me wrong, but like I just think that like the way that she died and handling her after the events of the funeral was just kind of like it was okay. It wasn't the greatest thing in the world, especially at the end. But one of the things I did enjoy about this part of the story is we get to see Logan's claws be cut off by the Silver Samurai with a heated sword. The visuals of it was pretty decent, and I found it to be kind of cool. But what I did not find cool was at the end of the day, Yoshida is in the suit, and that is the only reason he is even still alive, apparently. And they cut off the claws because the way to take his healing factor is by drilling holes into his bone claws and like taking his life force out of him. I'm not really sure. This part is just not a great aspect of the ending. Like I don't really like how they were like, well, you see, if you drill into his skin, then maybe that's the way to kind of get his healing factor. I just found that kind of lazy in a way. But eventually we get to see Wolverine with bone claws yet again. He sprouts more bone claws because obviously his metal claws are now gone. And then he does a really weird thing here.
You asked me to come say goodbye. Sayonara.
He throws him off the ledge, and thus is the end of Yoshida. Mariko is safe and keeps the company. Just kind of an odd fight. I just wasn't really a big fan of most of it. There's some cool parts here and there, but just like, you know, the resolution to it all and everything was just not what I was looking for at the end of the day. We see him leave Japan with Yukio in the plane, and thus begins the credits. Now, I will say, before we get to the post-credits scene, this also had a deleted scene here. There was an infamous deleted scene that had came out after this film was made, and it showed the first time of the iconic yellow suit. And this was cool because at the time we were like, why did you cut this? This is really cool. We could have a tease for it, and maybe he'll actually don the yellow suit. And that didn't come to fruition, unfortunately. But what was cool after that was we get a post-credit scene in this movie where we see Magneto come through an airport where Logan is, and they basically have a conversation about how dark times are upon them. We see Logan that is hesitant to talk to Magneto about it and not trusting him, so Magneto tells him, you wouldn't trust me, but you would trust somebody else, basically. And Charles Xavier comes out and freezes everybody, so now he has a reason to actually believe that there is something that is up. During this, we saw a TV flash Trust Industries, so this was the inevitable approach to Days of Future Past. This movie came out around the 2013 era, I want to say, so we were well into Marvel's Avengers post-credit scenes and stuff like that, and this was one of the few post-credit scenes that was like pretty interesting, and it kind of told you a little bit that you wanted to know, but it didn't tell you the full thing that was coming next. And the next film that was going to be shown after this one, not too long later, was going to be one of the better ones that they had ever made, which was X-Men Days of Future Past. Overall thoughts that I had was, for starters, I thought that the characters and all the development for everybody in this story was far better than we had seen in most of the X-Men movies to this point. Especially Wolverine, because we know that Wolverine is dealing with a ton of trauma, and this was just yet another example of that. And I gotta say, I love the setting for this story. Wolverine stories do end up taking place in Japan, and they spark for some great fights and some great art direction and stuff like that, so seeing it be on the big screen in this instant was awesome to see. The humor that was played throughout this movie was great. I enjoyed many of the jokes that they had in here, and God bless James Mangold, because without this, he would not have been able to make such a great movie afterwards in Logan. While some of the ending is a bit odd, I overall thoroughly enjoyed this movie. I'm gonna give The Wolverine 4 stars. Thank you guys so much for watching. We are kind of nearing the halfway point at this point for the X-Men movies. I want to give a brief update on how we're going to be scheduling the last few that we're going to be doing here. I don't know if I'm going to actually end up doing the New Mutants movie, unfortunately, but I will be doing, obviously, the rest of the X-Men movies here, and we'll be finishing off with the final 3 movies of this. While it's not going to be in chronological order for the releases up until this point, we are going to end off with Logan and the last 2 Deadpool movies. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. Look for all the socials down below where you can follow me on Twitter, TikTok, and all the other fun pages to see everything I have to say about movies. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will talk to you all next time.